Welcome to Sleep and History. In this video, you'll be guided into rest with calm, slow-paced storytelling. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. The year is 1340, and the rooster's cry wakes you before the sun rises. Mist lies heavy over the village, and a new day begins. You rise from a straw-filled bed inside a small cottage of timber and clay, its roof thatched with reeds. In the center stands a hearth, where last night's fire still glows faintly. The year is 1340, and the rooster's cry wakes you before the sun rises. Mist lies heavy over the village, and a new day begins. You rise from a straw-filled bed inside a small cottage of timber and clay, its roof thatched with reeds. In the center stands a hearth, where last night's fire still glows faintly. Spring brings hope. Men drive oxen across the soil, pulling wooden plows. You sow seeds into the earth and whisper prayers, "May God bless this year's harvest." Women tend gardens, children herd sheep. The smell of damp soil mixes with the promise of renewal. After the hunger of winter, spring feels like rebirth. Yet a shadow hangs over the land. For in these years, King Edward III has claimed the throne of France. In 1337, the 100 Years' War began, and though you will never see France, its weight presses upon you. The Lord demands more grain, more taxes for the king's armies. Young men are taken from the village to fight. Some never return. Summer arrives with burning heat. The sun scorches the fields, the soil hardens, and sweat runs down your back as you reap the wheat. Calloused hands grip the sickle, and every stalk cut is survival for the winter ahead. Women bind sheaves, children gather fallen eels of grain. Work is relentless, but without it, hunger will devour the village. At dusk, the village gathers in the square. Songs are sung, dances performed, laughter shared. These small joys are precious, for the shadow of war is never far. Soldiers arrive to collect taxes, to conscript boys barely old enough to hold a spear. One neighbor's son, only 16, is dragged away. His mother weeps, his father bows his head in silence. Illness spreads in the heat. Flies swarm, water fouls, children cough. The priest sprinkles holy water, prays over the sick, but often cannot save them. A wandering minstrel arrives one evening, singing of battles in France, of the king's victories. The villagers listen with awe and fear. Victories mean glory for the king, but for you, they mean heavier burdens, more taxes, more sons taken. Storms roll across the sky. Rain lashes the fields, sometimes blessing the crops, sometimes drowning them. Nature is the greatest power in your life, seen as God's will, yet often cruel. Storms roll across the sky. Rain lashes the fields, sometimes blessing the crops, sometimes drowning them. Nature is the greatest power in your life, seen as God's will, yet often cruel. Still, hope endures. Life is a cycle: spring sowing, summer toil, autumn harvest, winter hunger. You are part of this eternal rhythm. Autumn settles with cool winds and golden fields. It is the season of gathering and reckoning. The harvest is brought in, threshed and stored. Horses and oxen tread the grain, separating kernels from chaff. Children laugh, elders pray. Wheat is life itself, but the Lord's men arrive once more. Taxes are demanded, grain taken away. Your sweat, your labor, fills the Lord's granaries, while your own shelves remain bare. This injustice is the peasant's fate. The marketplace stirs with color. Traders bring salt, cloth, and spices. Minstrels sing ballads. Jugglers perform tricks. Merchants speak of London, Canterbury, and lands across the sea. You listen, imagining distant worlds, though you know your life will remain bound to the soil of this village. News arrives. The king's army has won a great victory in France. The villagers cheer, yet fear follows. Every triumph means more taxes, more conscription. You will never see the battlefield, but its shadow falls across your home. Autumn evenings grow cold. Families gather by the hearth, boiling soup of vegetables and scraps of meat. Children play. Elders tell stories of old kings and saints. These moments of warmth are fragile, for winter approaches. Snow will soon block the roads, hunger will gnaw, and sickness will spread. Autumn is a warning, a whisper of the hardships to come. Winter in the mid-14th century is merciless. Snow covers the fields, roads vanish beneath ice, and the cold seeps into every crack of your cottage walls. The hearth burns constantly, yet the chill lingers. Food is scarce. The salted meat stored in autumn grows tougher each day. Beans and peas are rationed carefully, and bread is thinner than ever. Hunger gnaws at the belly, and every meal is a calculation. How long can this last until spring? Children cough in the damp air, their cheeks pale. The elderly huddle close to the fire, their stories interrupted by shivers. Illness spreads quickly, and the priest moves from house to house, carrying holy water, whispering prayers in Latin. Faith is the only medicine most can afford. Outside, the world is silent. The fields lie dead, the trees bare. Work shifts from farming to survival, chopping wood, mending tools, repairing roofs battered by storms. Men trudge into the forest to gather firewood, returning with frost clinging to their beards. Women spin wool, patch clothing, and keep the hearth alive. Yet, even in winter, the king's shadow falls across the village. Edward III's campaigns in France demand endless resources. Messengers arrive with news of battles in Normandy and Brittany. Victories are celebrated in London, but here they mean heavier taxes. Yet, even in winter, the king's shadow falls across the village. Edward III's campaigns in France demand endless resources. Messengers arrive with news of battles in Normandy and Brittany. Victories are celebrated in London, but here they mean heavier taxes. The war also brings fear. Raiders and bandits, emboldened by chaos, roam the countryside. Villagers keep watch at night, listening for hoofbeats in the snow. The memory of Viking raids from centuries past lingers in Tyles. And though the enemy now is French, the dread of sudden violence feels the same. Evenings are long. Families gather by the fire, telling stories to push back the darkness. Tallies of saints, of Arthur and his knights, of miracles and omens. Children drift asleep while elders recall harsher winters survived. Hope is fragile, but it flickers like the flame in the hearth. Winter is a season of endurance. Hunger, sickness, and cold test the body and spirit. Yet the cycle continues. You know that spring will come, the soil will soften, and seeds will be sown again. Life is hardship, but it is also rhythm, and you are bound to it. The year is 1348, and whispers of a terrible sickness drift into the countryside. At first, it is only rumor, a plague spreading from distant lands, carried by ships into English ports. But soon, the rumors become reality. The Black Death arrives, and life changes forever. It begins with fever, swelling, and dark blotches upon the skin. Neighbors fall ill, and within days, they are gone. The church bell tolls endlessly, marking death after death. The graveyard fills so quickly that new pits are dug beyond the churchyard walls. Families bury their loved ones hurriedly, fearing the contagion. You watch as the village empties, houses stand silent, doors barred. The priest prays over the dying, but even he cannot escape the sickness. Fear grips every heart. Some believe it is God's punishment for sin. Others whisper of poisoned wells or curses. No one truly understands, only that death comes swiftly. By 1349, the plague has consumed nearly half the population. Fields lie untended, crops rot, animals wander without masters. The rhythm of life, sowing, harvesting, worship, collapses under the weight of mortality. You survive, but many of your kin and neighbors do not. The silence of the village is heavier than any winter storm. King Edward III still reigns, and the 100 Years' War continues across the Channel. Yet the war feels distant now, overshadowed by the plague. Armies falter as soldiers die, campaigns stall, and even the king cannot escape the devastation. Taxes are harder to collect, for there are fewer peasants left to pay them. King Edward III still reigns, and the 100 Years' War continues across the Channel. Yet the war feels distant now, overshadowed by the plague. Armies falter as soldiers die, campaigns stall, and even the king cannot escape the devastation. Taxes are harder to collect, for there are fewer peasants left to pay them. You, once a nameless laborer, now hold bargaining power. The tragedy of the Black Death reshapes society, giving peasants a voice they never had before. Yet the grief lingers. Every empty cottage, every abandoned field, is a reminder of the lives lost. The Black Death is not just a sickness. It is a turning point. It teaches you that life is fragile, that kings and peasants alike bow before death, and that survival itself can change the world. By the early 1350s, the plague has loosened its grip, though its scars remain etched into every corner of England. The population is shattered, but life begins to stir again. Villages that once echoed with silence now hear the sound of footsteps, voices, and trade. The marketplace becomes the heart of renewal. On certain days, villagers gather in the square, laying out goods upon wooden stalls. Salt, cloth, and spices arrive from distant towns. Local farmers bring eggs, cheese, and wool. The smell of roasted meat mingles with the sharp tongue of fish. For peasants, the marketplace is more than commerce. It is a chance to glimpse the wider world beyond the fields. Traveling merchants tell stories of London, of Canterbury, of ships sailing to Flanders and Italy. Their words paint pictures of bustling ports, cathedrals rising into the sky, and markets overflowing with goods. You listen, imagining distant lands, though you know your own life remains bound to the soil of your village. Into the scene come the wandering minstrels. With lutes and fiddles they sing ballads of kings and battles, of saints and miracles. Their voices carry tallies of Edward III's victories in France, of knights clad in armor, of banners flying over conquered towns. Children gather wide-eyed, elders nod knowingly, and for a moment, the hardships of plague and war fade into song. Jugglers and storytellers add color to the square. They perform tricks, recite romances, and weave legends of Arthur and his knights. These performances are not mere entertainment. They are a reminder that life, though fragile, still holds joy. Yet beneath the laughter lies change. The Black Death has altered society. With fewer workers, peasants demand better wages. Lords, weakened by loss, must concede. The marketplace reflects this shift. Peasants barter more boldly, merchants treat them with greater respect. The rigid order of feudal life begins to bend. Still, the king's shadow lingers. Taxes are collected, soldiers recruited. The 100 Years' War continues, draining resources. Victories in France are celebrated, but for you, they mean heavier burdens. The minstrels' songs of triumph remind you that glory for the crown often means hardship for the village. As the sun sets, the marketplace quiets. Stalls are packed away, merchants depart, and villagers return to their cottages. Yet the memory of music, stories, and trade lingers. In the aftermath of plague and under the weight of war, the marketplace and its wandering minstrels breathe life back into the village, offering hope that even in the darkest times, community and culture endure. By the mid-1350s, England is still locked in the 100 Years' War. The plague has passed, but its scars remain. Villages are smaller, families broken, yet the demands of war do not lessen. In 1356, news spreads of the Battle of Poitiers, where Edward's son, the Black Prince, captures the French King John II. The victory is celebrated across England, but in the village it means heavier taxes and renewed conscription. The lord's men arrive, demanding grain and coin. Young men are once again taken from their homes, leaving fields untended and families grieving. The war's shadow stretches across daily life. Even in years of good harvest, much of the yield is carted away to feed armies abroad. The marketplace reflects this burden. Prices rise, goods grow scarce. And merchants speak of shortages caused by endless campaigns. Villagers whisper of the king's glory, of banners flying over French towns. Yet for you, the war is only loss. You see it in the empty cottages, in the mothers who wait for sons who will never return, in the children who grow up without fathers. By 1360, the Treaty of Bretigny brings a temporary peace. England gains territory in France, and for a moment, the burden eases. Taxes lessen slightly, soldiers return home, and the village breathes. Yet the scars of war remain. The peace feels fragile, a pause rather than an end. In the evenings, families gather by the hearth, telling stories of survival. Elders recall harsher winters, children listen wide-eyed to tallies of knights and kings. Hope flickers, fragile but alive. The war may be distant, but its shadow never truly leaves the village. By the early 1360s, England is still under the reign of King Edward III. The Black Death has passed, leaving villages scarred and smaller. Yet life continues. The war in France drags on, but in the countryside, faith and festivals become the pillars of survival. Religion dominates daily life. The church bell marks the rhythm of the day. Morning prayers, midday mass, evening vespers. The priest, though often poor himself, is the spiritual anchor of the community. Latin chants echo from the stone church, and though you do not understand the words, you kneel, cross yourself, and believe. Faith is not just devotion. It is protection against hunger, war, and sickness. Seasonal festivals bring light into the darkness. Easter is celebrated with feasts, colored eggs, and processions. Christmas fills the church with candles, hymns, and shared bread. On Saints' Days, villagers gather in the square, carrying banners and relics, singing songs of devotion. These festivals are more than religious rituals. They are moments of joy, when the community comes together, forgetting hardship for a day. Music and dance fill the evenings. Minstrels sing ballads of saints and miracles. Jugglers perform tricks, and villagers dance in circles. Children laugh, elders smile, and for a brief time, the burdens of war and poverty fade. Yet, even in celebration, the king's shadow lingers. Taxes are collected during festivals, soldiers recruited after mass. The 100 Years' War continues, draining resources. Victories in France are praised in sermons, but for you they mean heavier burdens. Still, faith and festivals endure. They remind you that life is more than toil and suffering. They bind the community together, offering hope that even in the darkest times, joy and devotion can survive. By the late 1360s, the rhythm of peasant life is defined by the eternal cycle of the seasons. Though war continues across the Channel and taxes weigh heavily, the village clings to the familiar pattern of sowing, harvesting, and enduring. Spring is the season of renewal. Men drive oxen across the soil, pulling wooden plows. Seeds are sown with whispered prayers. May God bless this year's harvest. Women tend gardens, children herd sheep, and the smell of damp earth fills the air. After the hunger of winter, spring feels like rebirth. Yet the Lord's demands remind you that much of this bounty will not remain in your hands. Summer brings toil beneath the burning sun. Calloused hands grip sickles, sweat runs down backs, and every stalk cut is survival for the winter ahead. Women bind sheaves, children gather fallen ears of grain. At dusk, villagers gather in the square, singing songs and dancing, brief moments of joy before the shadow of war returns. Soldiers arrive to collect taxes, and boys are conscripted once more. Autumn is the season of reckoning. The harvest is gathered, threshed, and stored. Horses and oxen tread the grain, separating kernels from chaff. Children laugh, elders pray. Yet the Lord's men arrive again, demanding grain and coin. Your sweat fills the Lord's granaries, while your own shelves remain bare. The marketplace stirs with color. Merchants bring salt, cloth, and spices, and minstrels sing ballads of the king's victories. But every triumph means heavier burdens. Winter is endurance. Snow covers the fields, roads vanish beneath ice, and hunger gnaws at every belly. Families huddle by the hearth, telling stories to push back the darkness. Illness spreads quickly, and the priest prays over the sick. Yet even in winter, the king's shadow lingers. Taxes are collected, soldiers recruited, and the war continues. The cycle repeats year after year. Spring brings hope, summer toil, autumn reckoning, winter hardship. The rhythm is eternal, binding peasants to the land. Yet beneath this cycle, change stirs. The Black Death has altered society, giving peasants more bargaining power. The war continues, but the rigid order of feudal life begins to bend. By the early 1370s, the reign of King Edward III is entering its twilight. Once a vigorous monarch who launched the 100 Years' War with bold claims to the French throne, Edward is now aging, his health failing, and his grip on power weakening. The glory of victories at Crécy and Poitiers lies decades behind. The burdens of war and taxation remain heavy upon the peasants. Daily life in the village. The rhythm of the seasons continues. Spring sowing, summer toil, autumn harvest, winter hunger. Yet the scars of plague and war linger. Villages are smaller, families broken, and the Lord's demands remain relentless. Taxes are collected, soldiers recruited, and grain carted away to feed campaigns abroad. Children grow up hearing stories of the king's triumphs. But in the village, those triumphs mean empty granaries and absent fathers. The marketplace still bustles with merchants and minstrels, but prices rise and goods grow scarce. The war drags on, draining England's treasury. Victories are fewer, defeats more common. The French recover strength, and English campaigns falter. The Black Prince, Edward's heir, is himself weakened by illness, leaving the succession uncertain. For peasants, the war is a distant struggle, yet its shadow falls close. Taxes increase, labor is demanded, and the cycle of hardship continues. The songs of minstrels praising the king's glory ring hollow in the ears of villagers who see only loss. Religion remains the anchor. The church bell tolls, marking prayers and festivals. Saints' days bring brief joy, with processions, candles, and feasts. Faith offers meaning in a world of toil and uncertainty, yet whispers of unrest stir. Peasants, emboldened by the changes after the Black Death, begin to question the old order. They demand fairer wages, lighter burdens, and more freedom. The seeds of rebellion are sown, though they have not yet burst into flame. The king's decline. By 1377, Edward III dies, ending a reign that spanned 50 years. His passing marks the close of an era. The crown passes to his grandson, Richard II, a boy of only 10 years. For the peasants, the king's death is distant news, carried by messengers and priests. Yet they know that a child upon the throne means uncertainty, and uncertainty often brings hardship. In 1377, the long reign of Edward III ends. His grandson, Richard II, only 10 years old, ascends the throne. A child king means uncertainty. The kingdom is ruled by regents and powerful nobles, while the boy grows under their shadow. For peasants, the change brings little relief. Taxes remain heavy, the war in France continues, and the burden of survival presses harder than ever. The rhythm of the seasons continues: spring sowing, summer toil, autumn harvest, winter hunger. Yet whispers of unrest spread. The Black Death has reduced the population, giving peasants more bargaining power. Lords resist, clinging to old privileges, but peasants demand fairer wages and lighter burdens. Tension grows in every village. The 100 Years' War drags on. Victories are fewer, defeats more common, and the treasury runs dry. To fund campaigns, the crown imposes new taxes. In 1377, a poll tax is introduced. Every man and woman must pay, regardless of wealth. For peasants, this is unbearable. Families already struggling to survive now face crushing demands. By 1380, resentment boils. Priests like John Ball preach equality, declaring that all men are born free. His words spread among peasants when Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman. These sermons ignite hope and anger. Villagers whisper of justice, of rising against lords who exploit them. By 1381, the tension is ready to explode. The poll tax is raised again, and collectors arrive in villages, demanding payment. Resistance flares. Men refuse, women shout, children throw stones. The spark of rebellion is lit. The young king, Richard II, sits upon the throne, but the kingdom trembles beneath him. The peasants, long silent under the weight of war and plague, are ready to rise. The year is 1381, and the kingdom trembles. The poll tax, imposed 3 times in 4 years, has pushed peasants beyond endurance. Collectors arrive in villages, demanding payment from every man and woman, rich or poor. Resistance flares. Families refuse, women shout, children throw stones. the spark of rebellion ignites. In Kent and Essex, peasants gather under the leadership of War Taylor, a man of humble origins but fierce determination. Alongside him, the radical priest John Ball preaches equality, when Adam delved and Ave span, who was then the gentleman. His words spread like wildfire, inspiring peasants to believe that the old order can be overturned. Thousands of peasants march toward London, armed with farm tools, bows, and sheer anger. Villages empty as men join the uprising, leaving fields untended. The rebels storm manors, burn tax records, and free prisoners. Their cry is simple: justice, freedom, and an end to oppression. When they reach London, the city gates open. Sympathy runs deep among townsfolk who also suffer under taxation. The rebels flood the streets, demanding to see the king. The young king, only 14 years old, rides out to meet the rebels at Mile End. He promises reforms, the end of serfdom, fair wages, and justice. The peasants cheer, believing victory is near. For a moment, hope fills the air. The king has listened, but the promise is fragile. At Smithfield, Wat Tyler meets the king again. Tension rises. Accounts differ, but Tyler is struck down, killed before the crowd. Chaos erupts. The king, showing unexpected courage, rides forward and declares himself the leader of the people. The rebels, stunned, disperse. The revolt collapses. Promises of freedom are revoked. Leaders are hunted. John Ball is captured and executed, and villagers face harsh reprisals. Yet the uprising leaves a mark. Though crushed, it shows that peasants can rise, that their voices matter, and that the old order is not unshakable. The peasants' revolt of 1381 is a turning point. It does not end serfdom immediately, but it plants seeds of change. The memory of Wat Tyler and John Ball lingers, whispered in cottages and marketplaces, a reminder that even the lowliest can challenge kings. The peasants' revolt of 1381 has ended, but its echoes linger. The uprising shook the kingdom, forcing the young king to face his people. Yet once the rebellion collapsed, the crown moved swiftly to reassert control. Leaders of the revolt are hunted down. John Ball is captured and executed, his sermons silenced by the sword. Villages that joined the rebellion face punishment, fines, confiscations, and brutal reminders of the king's authority. The promises of freedom made at Mile End are revoked. Serfdom remains, wages are restricted, and the old order is restored. For peasants, life returns to its familiar rhythm: spring sowing, summer toil, autumn harvest, winter hunger. Yet the memory of rebellion lingers. Families whisper of Wat Tyler's courage, of John Ball's words, at the brief moment when freedom seemed possible. Though crushed, the revolt has planted seeds of defiance. Richard too grows into his kingship. By the late 1380s, he asserts more personal authority, clashing with powerful nobles. His court becomes a place of extravagance, filled with art, ceremony, and symbolism. For peasants, these displays mean little, except that taxes rise to fund the king's grandeur. Though the revolt is suppressed, the peasant spirit is not broken. They begin to demand better terms quietly, negotiating wages and freedoms in small ways. Lords, weakened by the plague and war, cannot always resist. The rigid bonds of feudalism begin to loosen, slowly but surely. The 100 Years' War continues, draining resources. Victories are fewer, defeats more common. Taxes remain heavy, soldiers are recruited, and the burden falls hardest on peasants. Yet beneath this weight, the memory of rebellion endures, a reminder that even the lowliest can rise. By the 1390s, the reign of Richard II grows increasingly unstable. Once the child king who faced the peasants at Mile End, Richard is now a young man determined to assert his authority. Richard surrounds himself with art, ceremony, and symbolism. His court is filled with lavish displays, golden robes, and elaborate rituals. He believes kingship is sacred, ordained by God, and demands obedience. For peasants, these displays mean little, except that taxes rise to fund the king's grandeur. The great lords of England grow restless. They resent Richard's favoritism toward his inner circle and his disregard for traditional counsel. Tensions erupt into open conflict. In 1387, the Lords Appellant challenged Richard's authority, defeating his forces and executing his allies. Though Richard regains power in the 1390s, the memory of rebellion haunts him. For peasants, life continues in its familiar rhythm, sowing, harvesting, enduring. Yet the instability of the crown trickles down. Taxes rise, soldiers are recruited, and uncertainty spreads. The memory of the peasants' revolt lingers, whispered in cottages and marketplaces. Though crushed, it planted seeds of defiance that never fully die. By 1399, Richard's rule collapses. His cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, returns from exile, gathers support, and seizes the throne. Richard is deposed, imprisoned, and eventually dies in captivity. The crown passes to Henry IV, beginning the Lancastrian dynasty. For peasants, the change of king is distant news, carried by messengers and priests. Yet they know that each new monarch brings new demands, new taxes, and new uncertainties. The shadow of the king never lifts, it only changes shape. The winter of 1400 settles over England like a heavy cloak. The old order has fallen. Richard II lies imprisoned and forgotten, and Henry Bolingbroke has seized the crown as King Henry IV. His ascent marks the birth of the Lancastrian dynasty, but the kingdom he inherits is weary, scarred by rebellion, war, and famine. Snow drifts across the castle courtyards. Inside, the new king sits beneath flickering torches, his crown gleaming, but his eyes shadowed. He knows that power taken by force must be defended by fear. Outside the walls, peasants huddle around fires, whispering of yet another king who promises justice but brings only heavier burdens. Henry's reign begins with unrest. The Percy family of Northumberland, once his allies, rise against him. The Battle of Shrewsbury 1403 drenches the fields in blood. The king's victory is decisive but costly. His own son, Prince Hal, fights bravely and is wounded. The bond between father and son is forged in fire and doubt. In the villages, life continues under the weight of winter. Tax collectors ride through snow-covered lanes, demanding coin for the king's wars. Mothers clutch their children, men offer what little they have, and soldiers march toward distant battlefields. Yet, amid hardship, the rhythm of life persists. Fires burn, bread is baked, and prayers rise into the cold air. Henry IV grows older, his health failing. He is haunted by guilt and rebellion, by the crown he took and the blood spilled to keep it. In the quiet of his chamber, he gazes at the golden circlet upon his table, a symbol of triumph and torment. Outside, the kingdom waits for his son, Prince Hal, to inherit the throne and the endless shadow of war. The crown passes from father to son. Henry V, young and resolute, inherits a kingdom weary of rebellion, but hungry for glory. He is not the reckless prince of taverns and laughter anymore. The crown has hardened him. His gaze turns toward France, where the old claim of Edward III still burns like an ember waiting to be fanned into flame. In the spring of 1415, the king summons his knights. Banners unfurl in the wind, red and gold lions roaring against the sky. The forges ring with the sound of steel. Ships are prepared at Southampton. Peasants watch from the fields as their sons march away, leaving behind ploughs for swords. The promise of honor and plunder drives the army forward, though few will return. The campaign begins in hardship. Rain and mud swallow the roads, disease spreads through the ranks, and hunger gnaws at every soldier. Yet Henry's resolve never falters. He prays each night beneath the stars, his armor glinting in the firelight, whispering that God's will guides England's sword. On October 21st, 1415, the English army, weary, outnumbered, and trapped, faces the French host near a small village called Agincourt. The ground is soaked with rain, turning to thick mud. Henry rides before his men, his voice steady. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. The archers plant their stakes, draw their longbows, and unleash a storm of arrows. The French knights charge, their horses sinking into the mire. The battle becomes chaos, mud, blood, and cries of victory. When the sun sets, England stands triumphant. Henry V kneels upon the battlefield, surrounded by the fallen. His victory is total, yet his heart is heavy. He prays for the dead, friend and foe alike. The crown upon his head gleams faintly in the fading light, a symbol of glory bought with suffering. The triumph at Agincourt echoes across Europe. Songs are sung of England's glory, and Henry V is hailed as God's chosen warrior. Yet beneath the banners and praise lies the heavy cost of war. The fields of France are littered with the dead. Survivors limp home, scarred and broken. Villagers in England welcome back sons who can no longer plough or fight. Mothers weep for those who never return. Victory has brought honor, but it has also brought silence to many hearths. Taxes rise to fund campaigns. Grain is taken, livestock seized, and men conscripted. In winter, hunger gnaws at the poor. Fires burn low, bread is thin, and prayers rise in cold chapels. The peasants endure, whispering that the king's glory is bought with their suffering. Henry V, though triumphant, feels the weight of his crown. He kneels in chapels, praying for forgiveness. He knows that victory is fleeting, that the blood spilled cannot be undone. In his private chambers, he gazes at the circlet of gold, wondering if it is a blessing or a curse. The war continues, treaties are signed, and England's power grows, yet the seeds of sorrow are sown. The peasants endure hardship, the soldiers bear scars, and the king carries the burden of triumph. The price of victory is written not in songs, but in silence, hunger, and grief. The triumphs of Henry V fade quickly. In 1422, the warrior king dies unexpectedly, leaving the throne to his infant son, Henry VI, barely 9 months old. England, victorious, yet vulnerable, now bows to a child. Regents and nobles rule in the boy's name. The crown rests upon a cradle, and the kingdom whispers of fate. The child king grows in the shadow of his father's glory, but his reign begins with fragility. France still smoulders with war, and England's unity is strained by ambition. For peasants, life continues under the weight of taxes and a rhythm of seasons. Winter brings hunger, spring brings hope, and summer brings toil. Villagers pray in candlelit chapels, hoping the child king will bring peace. Yet soldiers march, banners rise, and the war lingers on. As Henry grows, his gentle nature becomes clear. He is pious, scholarly, and soft-spoken, a king of prayer, not of battle. Nobles begin to doubt his strength. Rivalries ignite between powerful houses, laying the foundation for the Wars of the Roses. Henry VI spends long hours in chapels, gazing at crucifixes, whispering prayers. He dreams of peace while his kingdom drifts toward conflict. The crown upon his head is heavy, not with glory, but with uncertainty. The gentle reign of Henry VI cannot hold the kingdom together. His piety and softness leave a vacuum, and into that void step ambitious nobles. England, weary of war abroad, now turns its swords inward. Two great houses rise in rivalry, Lancaster and York. Their banners, red, rose, and white, become symbols of division. The people whisper of omens, of kings unfit to rule, of destiny written in blood. For peasants, the war is a distant thunder that soon crashes upon their homes. Armies march through fields, trampling crops, seizing food, and conscripting men. Winter brings hunger, summer brings fear. Families pray for peace, but the roses bloom only in conflict. The king himself falters. At times he drifts into silence, lost in visions, unable to speak or rule. His crown slips, and regents take control. The people see a monarch more ghost than king, a fragile soul in a world of steel. Battles erupt. St. Albans, 1455, Toten, 1461, fields soaked in English blood. Brothers fight brothers, neighbours turn against neighbours. The war is not for land abroad, but for the very soul of England. The roses bloom in violence, and the kingdom fractures. The people endure as they always have, beneath banners they did not choose. The crown passes between houses, and the land waits for peace that never comes. The roses have bled England dry. Lancaster and York clash endlessly, and the people grow weary of war. Villages are burned, fields lie fallow, and the crown passes from hand to hand, like a burden no one can carry for long. In 1485, the Wars of the Roses culminate at Bosworth Field. Richard III falls, and Henry Tudor seizes the crown as Henry VII, founding the Tudor dynasty. The red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York are united in the Tudor emblem, symbolizing peace, though scars remain deep. Daily life shifts. The medieval rhythms of feudalism begin to fade. Towns grow, trade expands, and the first whispers of the Renaissance reach England. The peasants still toil, but new opportunities emerge in markets and guilds. The old order of knights and castles gives way to merchants and scholars. The 15th century closes with change. Printing presses spread knowledge, voyages across the seas promise new worlds, and the medieval age yields to the dawn of modernity. The crown, once a symbol of endless war, now becomes the emblem of a new dynasty and a new age. The Middle Ages fade into memory. Castles still stand, but their walls no longer guard the future. A new spirit rises, one of art, science, and discovery. The Renaissance dawns, reshaping the world and awakening minds long bound by tradition. Printing presses hum across Europe, spreading books and ideas faster than ever before. Scholars rediscover the wisdom of Greece and Rome, blending it with new thought. In England, Italy, and beyond, knowledge becomes power, and learning becomes a flame that cannot be extinguished. Painters and sculptors breathe life into stone and canvas. Human faces, once hidden behind symbolism, now shine with emotion and realism. Cathedrals echo with music, and poetry flows like rivers. The Renaissance is not only a rebirth of knowledge, but of beauty. Ships sail west and south, chasing the edge of the world. New lands are found, new peoples encountered, and the map of the earth expands. The medieval village gives way to global horizons, and the age of exploration begins. The medieval rhythms of feudalism fade. Merchants rise, cities grow, and kings rule with new ambitions. The Renaissance is both a dawn and a farewell. The end of the Middle Ages, the beginning of modernity. The medieval age has ended. What began with peasants in snowy villages and kings crowned in battle now closes, with ships crossing oceans and empires rising across continents. The Reformation divides Europe. Protestants and Catholics clash, kingdoms fracture, and faith itself becomes a battlefield. The crown is no longer only a symbol of power, but of belief. Colonies grow overseas, trade networks expand, and wealth flows into Europe. Merchants rise in power, cities flourish, and the old feudal bonds weaken. The rhythms of medieval life vanish into the tide of modernity. The journey from 1340 to 1650 is complete. From the quiet of village hearths to the roar of battlefields, from roses blooming in civil war to sails unfurling across the seas, the medieval world has passed. A new age begins, filled with discovery, empire, and the promise of revolutions yet to come. Our journey through the calmest stories of history ends here. May this narration have slowed your thoughts and prepared you for peaceful sleep. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and give it a like. See you in the next episode.